Time now for the news review. The French Prime Minister vows to push ahead with pensions overhaul, but offers concessions to workers' unions.
We will guarantee a minimum pension of 1,000 euros net per month for a full career earning minimum wage. It will be a social revolution that will remain as a victory, especially for farmers, craftsmen and small businesses. We will maintain the minimum retirement age as 62. The legal age, which allows retirement at 62 years old, will not be changed. It's a principle of freedom that we would like to stay true by allowing each one the possibility to go on retirement starting 62 years old if their career path allows them or encourages them to do so.
Philippe reiterated that the government would replace a convoluted system of more than 42 separate schemes with a universal points-based system. He added that the system will apply to those entering the job market for the first time in 2022. Senior officials with the General Confederation of Labour Union dismissed the government's announcement, describing it as a joke. They noted that all conditions are in place to harden the strikes against pension reforms. This as workers continue their strike for the 7th day, causing commuter chaos in the capital Paris and elsewhere. The unions say that the changes to the exiting pension system will force many to work longer for a smaller retirement payout. Joining us to discuss this further, Gearóid Colmáin, a journalist and political analyst, joins us from Paris. We also have Ian Williams, senior analyst at Foreign Policy in Focus, who joins us from New York. I'd like to welcome you both. Gearóid Colmáin, let me first start with you. What are we looking at when it comes here? Obviously, the government is saying that they're not going to budge, and the unions and, of course, many of the French are saying we're going to strike harder. Gearóid Colmáin, do you have us?
Sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Yeah, basically, we're looking at the government saying they're not going to budge from their stance. They're going to go through with the reforms. The unions and, of course, the French that are affected by this say we're going to continue protesting. Where do you think this is going to go?
Nowhere, I would say, unless there's regime change. That's the shortest answer. The general process is implementing EU directives on reform, which will basically make it easier for the oligarchy to extend their control over the country. And that's the kind of plan for the EU in general. What you have here is an aging population, so you have more and more people who are going to need pensions. You have an imbalance between, an aging population and that means less young people, so less people working in the future. So they're going to have trouble financing the pensions. And of course, they're encouraging abortion. They're encouraging, people not to have children. Social issues like LGBT, this is all the kind of stuff they're encouraging in the schools now. So the future is bleak because people aren't having any children, and people are getting older and older. And for people getting older and going on, retirement, they won't have as much money as they had in the past. What you're seeing essentially is a proletarianisation of society where everything is being brought down to the lowest common denominator. And that's where this is going.
Ian Williams, maybe it's a matter of money here in terms of the government not having enough to pay out for some of the people who are going to retire, the retirement age being younger. So in a sense, they want the retirement age to be older because we know there's a pension actually crisis across the globe somewhat. Is France experiencing that, and is that the case?
Well, yes, there is an age balance, growing numbers of older people, diminishing numbers of younger people, although immigration is actually attending to that in both France and the US. The younger immigrants, who a lot of people dislike, are the ones who come in and they fill up the pension funds. They're the ones working to replace the older retiring workers. But I think the key issue here is of a sort of trust and ideology. Right across Western Europe and across the US, austerity measures have been put in, which are thinly disguised attempts to transfer wealth from the poorer working people to the oligarchy, to the billionaires. And that's the way it always comes out. So yes, they call it reforms, but it's quite clear it's a shift. They do the same thing in the US. The Chilean pension reform, which was held up for this, is a complete disaster, and it's still being touted as a model whereby you sort of force people to finance their own pensions. The state and the employers don't play any part of it. And for a worker, the pension is a deferred salary, it's deferred wages. You work now in the anticipation of a pension in the future, and this is a breaking of the social contract. So if it were straightforward, if this was a government that could be trusted, that was seen to have the welfare of normal working people at heart, then you could take it for granted. But I'm presuming that most of the French suspect that this government isn't to be trusted, doesn't have their interest at heart, and that this whole reform is a thinly disguised attempt to loot their pensions and to transfer yet more money to the ultra-rich. It's certainly the way it is in America, where the social security system has been under continual attack for decades, with spurious pension, the welfare running out, the social security fund running out, that it won't be funded. There's always unlimited amounts of money for handouts to businesses and for military expenditure, but never enough for pensions. Pensions are always a drain on the treasury, unlike all of the other expenditures that grandiose militarist governments put out.
But Joel Colmáin, we know that there's these Yellow Vest protests that are happening now. They started back in 2018, still going on. And we know that there are many who are unsatisfied with the way the French president has performed. And now you have this going on. How much of a danger is this current French government, in particular the French president's, when it comes to its overall standing, now that you have this pension reform being resisted by majority of ones who are getting affected by it?
Well, it's true that the Macron regime has come under tremendous pressure in recent years, with since the start of the Gilets jaunes movement last year. You have sort of increasing amounts of protests for many causes, and this is gelling. This is sort of joining up with the Gilets jaunes movement now, and it is a formidable strike. In fact, the media here were given directives not to use the word general strike. There were certain words they were not allowed to use in their coverage of the strike, of the general strike, and we haven't seen the kind of brutality that we've seen in foreign media because of censorship. So they are doing their best to play it down. You know, the role of the media, of course, is always to play down internal unrest, and they focus on foreign unrest. When there's an uprising in Iran backed by some other foreign powers, then all the cameras are on it. But when their own people are rising up against these extremely unpopular policies, then there's an attempt to cover it up. I think that on the question of the future of France and Europe, immigration is, as your guest said, an important factor actually in paying, in getting people into the workforce in Germany, for example, and in France. But there's also the function of mass immigration, which is to drive down wages. So what you're looking at in this process of proletarianisation is workers being brought in but being paid less and less, and sort of living in more and more abject conditions, and a general sort of impoverishment and a sort of leveling down of society between an oligarchy, an all-powerful oligarchy on the one hand, and sort of a proletariat on the other. This won't be solved until you get back national sovereignty. You need to get. In France, they had a law which was passed in 1973. It's called the Rothschild Law, or the Pompidou-Giscard Law, which basically mandates that the state has to borrow money from international bondholders and financiers to finance the economy. The state has no sovereignty. It has no capacity to actually change the situation because the country's in debt. It's a debt economy. It's a racket economy, and that won't change unless the country actually gets back its national sovereignty. It should actually have its own money. In France, the big problem is that the euro did not work for France. It worked better for Germany because essentially it's the Deutschmark, and the Germans maintained their export economy, a high-class export economy, high-class technology. And in France, you've had a massive deindustrialization.
Well, thank you so much for that, Joe Colmáin, journalist and political analyst. Thank you, Ian Williams, senior analyst at Foreign Policy in Focus. And that does it for our news review.